Cocoa originated from the Amazon River basin in Central and South America and has been widely planted there since over 500 years ago. The natural habitat of cocoa is in the lower canopies of tropical rainforests, where light intensity is low, air humidity is high, and the temperature differences between night and day, as well as months in the years, are low. Cocoa growing countries all lie within 15 degrees latitude north and south. In Vietnam, cocoa is mostly planted in the Mekong Delta, western highlands, and coastal provinces of the central regions. Of the cocoa pod, the main parts that get used are the beans, with a fat content taking up 50 to 60% mass of the beans. Fermented beans, after roasted, are grinded in heated conditions from 50 to 60 degrees Celsius into a brown, viscous liquid called cocoa liquor. At this temperature, the mass is in liquid form. In normal conditions, however, the cocoa liquor solidifies into a solid mass. When cocoa liquor is pressed, we separate cocoa butter and cocoa cake. Grinding the cocoa cake gives us cocoa powder. Cocoa liquor, cocoa powder, and cocoa butter are the main ingredients for the food and confectionery industry. Chocolate is a mixture between cocoa liquor, cocoa butter, sugar, and other ingredients depending on the recipe of each producer. Furthermore, cocoa shells and cocoa leaves are also a food source for goats, cows, and rabbits. Currently, on a global market, cocoa supply sources are becoming scarce and expensive. Meanwhile, the global consumption demand for cocoa is still increasing, leading to a situation where supply cannot meet with demand, especially in countries like Russia, China, Ukraine, and the Middle East. That is why cocoa price on the global market in recent years has been increasing and remains stable. This is an opportunity for us to develop new cocoa planting area and increase cocoa production yield. In reality, Vietnam's cocoa planting area has been growing non-stop and is gradually becoming a main crop that brings economic benefits to farmers. To help farmers cultivate cocoa to its maximum efficiency, we would like to provide fellow farmers with the following crucial techniques in cocoa planting and cultivation. Shading for cocoa is a key factor that will ultimately define success in the establishment stage. It is imperative that if shading is not guaranteed, cocoa should not be planted. The main purpose of shading is to reduce the intensity of direct sunlight, which is not suitable for the process of photosynthesis in cocoa, to avoid the leaves and young branches from being sunburnt, and to reduce sudden humidity changes in the air and in the soil surrounding the cocoa plant. Shade trees must be planted before or right when cocoa is planted. Suitable shade trees must meet the following requirements. Shade trees must grow fast, have thin but evenly distributed canopies, have economic values, does not share pests and diseases with cocoa, and provide minimal nutritional competition with cocoa. However, there are few plants in nature that will comply with all these requirements. Therefore, to meet with all the technical requirements for cocoa, the farmer must act accordingly, depending on the characteristics of each plant. Shade trees for cocoa have two categories: temporary shade trees and permanent shade trees. Temporary shade trees are fast-growing trees like Cotillaria, banana, and Lucina. These trees will be chopped down or die out when cocoa are fully grown. Permanent shade trees are trees planted along with cocoa and will exist for the duration of the cocoa's lifespan. Permanent shade trees can be Lucina, coconut, durian, forest trees with thin canopies like Hopera odorata, neem tree, and cassia. Permanent shade trees need to be planted before or intercropped in areas with already established shading like coconut plantations, cashew, durian, or forests prone to thin density. In the case that permanent shade trees are not yet established, it is necessary to use temporary shade trees or alternative shading methods for the duration it takes for the shade trees to establish. Cocoa leaves have large blades and long petiole, which makes them easily broken when swayed or scratched in strong and extended winds, causing the cocoa trees to be stunted and grow slow. Frequent strong wind will twist the cocoa's canopies, making it difficult for architecture control. In cocoa growing areas with strong wind, wind breaking is an ever more important part. Trees that are used for wind breaking are trees with tall trunks and deep roots to prevent falling in strong winds, have large canopies, and are economically beneficial. The most common windbreaker used in western highlands is cassia. However, other trees like jackfruit, mango, lucina, acacia, rubber can all be used to establish wind-breaking barriers. Tall stem grass and cotalaria grown in rows are effective at windbreaking at low height while providing shade during the establishment stage. Cocoa is an industrial perennial crop, therefore, planting material selection is very important. If we are wrong in the planting material selection process, we will lose many years' worth of time and energy fixing this mistake. For that reason, planting material selection is always the most long-term impacting decision. Cocoa is a pollinating crop, so we should have at least 5 clones in the plantation. When there are many clones of cocoa in the plantation, the rate of pollination increases and so will the rate of pod bearing. Even so, the rate of distribution between the clones in a plantation does not have to be even. Currently, in the highlands or in area where water access is difficult, we should use a lot of TD6. TD6 has the characteristic of withstanding drought, large pods with good yield. TD6 is also especially resistant to VSD, a very dangerous disease on cocoa. Besides TD6, we should also use a lot of TD8. TD8 has thin pod shells, large beans, and high yield. Then there's TD9. The pods are large and so are the beans. TD9 also has a reasonable sized canopy. TD9 usually have a slow development rate. Therefore, we don't have to spend a lot of effort on pruning. TD3 is also a very suitable clone for various plantations. Although TD3 has small pods, the beans are large, gives high yield, and bear pods very early. As for TD5, we should limit the number of TD5 because even though TD5 has high yield, tree development is very strong, so we will have to spend a lot of effort on pruning. TD5 is also susceptible to black pod and stem canker. Other breeds that the Ministry of Agriculture has approved includes TD10, TD7, TD2 are also very suitable for mixing up diversity in the plantation. Cocoa farmers must take note that they should not use seeds for planting, even if taken from high-yield commercial clones. Cocoa is a pollinating crop, therefore the F1 generation will segregate from the parent. We cannot predict the yield or the quality, and so making it impossible to control the yield or quality of the next generation. Clones have the advantage of having high uniform quality and yield. Furthermore, clones have higher yield and certain clones have high resistance against pests and diseases like VSD. If we want cocoa to develop and grow well, seedling quality selection takes up the most important role after clone selection. A seedling that is up to standard for planting must meet the following criteria. The height from the grafting point to the top is at least 25 centimeters, regardless of top grafting or side grafting. The trunk diameter must be at least 4 millimeters and above. All the leaves must be well and healthy, with no signs of pests and diseases. Currently, most cocos in plantations are planted at a distance of 3 meters by 3 meters. This distance is reasonable for true seedlings and clones. If planted in higher density, maximum productivity will also be reached faster, but initial capital investment in clones, labor, and architecture control during production stage will be much higher. If cocoa is intercropped, cocoa's density will depend accordingly on the density and type of pre-existing crop. Usually, when farmers intercrop cocoa with cashew or coconut, the density would be around 400 to 700 trees per hectare. If cocoa is planted in the highlands, holes must be dug. The size of holes will depend on the quality of the soil and the amount of organic fertilizer used. Normally, a planting hole will have the dimensions of 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. However, regions in the Mekong Delta like Bến Tre or Cần Thơ, where sea levels is high and water table is heavily affected by the tide, cocoa must be planted at ground level or on mounds instead of in holes. Before planting in new areas or new forests where termites reside, planting holes must be treated with pesticides beforehand. Pesticides are sprayed in the bottom and around the sides of the hole before lowering the plant. To prepare for cocoa planting, we must dig holes. The most suitable size holes for cocoa are also similar to coffee. During the process of digging holes, we separate the top soil, rich in organic matter and nutrients, to the side. Base fertilizer for each hole includes 50 grams of phosphate, spread evenly on the top soil. Then we add 5 to 10 kilograms of composed manure for each hole. We should also add about 300 to 500 agricultural lime for each hole. After mixing well the mixture of manure, surface soil, lime and phosphate, we return this mixture back to the pit until about 1 month before planting the cocoa tree. Before placing the mixture into the planting hole, we need to break down the walls around the hole. Before planting, we need to cut the bottom of the bag and crooked roots with a sharp knife. Cut lightly along the length of the cocoa seedling bag. Place the entire bag of soil with the bottom cut into the hole and cover up the surrounding base with soil. Press the soil lightly and slowly pull the plastic bag out of the soil mass. In areas with extended drought, the top of the soil bags need to be placed 7 to 10 centimeters below the soil surface. After planting, we will also need to spray pesticide on the surface soil around the planting area and all over the tree trunk. This way, not only will we prevent termites, but also other pests that sting and eat the leaves. After planting the cocoa tree, we need to use organic matters like dried leaves, branches, and cover the roots to keep the soil maintained at an appropriate moisture content for the trees to grow while also reducing evaporation. Furthermore, base covering also serves the purpose of preventing dirt from splashing onto the leaves during rain, spreading diseases caused by the fungus Phytophthora. However, when covering the tree's base, it must be noted that we should not cover too close to the trunk, which might lead to too high humidity, making the trunk easily be infected by diseases. After planting, if there are short drought periods, irrigation is necessary for new roots to develop and for the tree to recover its full growing capability. During the seedling stage, the cocoa tree only needs 25 to 50% direct sunlight, which is why we need to provide proper shading for it to develop properly. We can use any material to provide shading for the plant. For example, shade cloth, hay, or different types of grasses. We need to maintain this shade until the temporary or permanent shade trees are providing sufficient shading for the cocoa. Furthermore, after planting, we need to keep the plant stem straight and regularly prune the lower branch buds. When participating in a UTZ certified program, farmers will need to take note of the following. 1. Do not cut down forests to grow cocoa. 2. When growing cocoa in a reservation area, the management of the reservation must be notified. 3. When growing cocoa on a sloped area, erosion prevention methods must be taken like growing shade trees, making terraces and reservoirs to prevent erosion and covering bases. 4. Practice cultivation methods that preserve the environment like not using too much synthesized fertilizer, constantly practicing methods to increase soil humus. Cocoa needs a lot of irrigation during the dry season and through persistent small droughts during the rainy season. With enough water, flowers will bloom more, pods will have good bean size, and the tree will be healthier. However, cocoa is a crop that cannot tolerate being waterlogged. Therefore, in the rainy season, there needs to be a good drainage system to limit the diseases in the roots and reduce the harm from Phytophthora. During the dry season of the new planting year, we should water the cocoa trees to help them grow and develop well. The amount of water irrigated changes depending on the method of irrigation, type of soil, and technique of cultivation. In this stage, because the root system has not yet thrived, each irrigation session only needs to focus on the root area. In sandy soil, the time gap between irrigation is shorter compared to basalt soil or clay soil. To increase water use efficiency and reduce the number of irrigation times, in the case of direct irrigation with rubber hose, set up reservoirs to contain water. On top of that, cocoa trees' base needs to be covered well during the dry season to reduce water evaporation and limit sudden changes in temperature. When irrigating infant cocoa trees, we do not point the hose directly at the base to prevent erosion from injuring the tree's roots. If we can combine irrigation with fertilizing, then we only need to provide sufficient moisture in areas where the roots are growing. Do not let water overflow the basin of the tree, or too much water will spill out of the vertical root system. In this stage, we need to irrigate with the amount of 50 to 100 liters per tree per session. Period of irrigation is every 10 to 15 days. When cocoa approaches production stage, irrigation amount needs to be increased to 150 to 200 liters per tree per session. Period of irrigation is every 15 to 20 days. The plantation needs to guarantee shading and surface coverage to limit water evaporation during the dry season. The source of water for irrigation can come from rivers, lakes, or wells that are not contaminated by salt or low pH. Right now, there are many methods to irrigate cocoa, such as sprinkler irrigation, drip irrigation, and hose irrigation. During the establishment stage, we can use sprinkler irrigation. However, when the trees are in production stage and the amount of pods and flowers are plenty, we apply hose irrigation or drip irrigation. With hose irrigation, we can use different types of motor pump. Drip irrigation is used widely in the southeast and southwest of Vietnam. Traditional irrigation method by direct water hose has many disadvantages like wasting water due to overflow, evaporation by sunlight and wind, water absorption in areas without roots, requiring high pressure in order to pump water. On top of that, it requires much labor to drag the hoses and build a reservoir. With drip irrigation, water will soak gradually into the soil and straight to the root system. It does not waste water and does not irrigate in non-growth areas. Since water is only irrigated in areas where there are roots, the amount of water required is much lower but still maintaining sufficient soil moisture. Less water is also lost due to sunlight and wind. Through drip irrigation, the water flow is low and extremely efficient, which allows for irrigation on a much larger area compared to traditional methods. Also through drip irrigation, fertilizer can be regularly supplied to the trees in small amounts, so efficiency of use is also extremely high. In the dry season, the amount of cocoa pods on the trees are still plenty. That is why we must increase the amount of fertilizer during each irrigation session so that the cocoa beans will be large and firm. It will also guarantee that the amount of sustenance in the tree is consistent so that more flowers and pods will bore during the next raining season. When participating in the UTZ certified program, farmers will need to take note of the following. 1. Don't irrigate cocoa with water from polluted water sources. 2. Avoid wasteful irrigation to preserve the underground reservoir and prevent erosion of nutrients. Through field testing in Vietnam, we can estimate that in the first year, the amount of fertilizer needed for each tree is about 150 to 200 grams of NPK fertilizer per year. In the second year, the amount of fertilizer needed is increased to 300 to 400 grams per tree, and in the third year, 500 to 600 grams per tree. From the fourth year onwards, the cocoa tree goes into full production stage. The purpose of fertilizing in this stage is to maintain the tree's growth and replenish the nutrients it needs to create pods and beans. Depending on the conditions of the local land and the cocoa yield, that we balance out the necessary amount of fertilizer needed for the trees. The principle of fertilizing for cocoa during production stage is based on the amount of nutrients that the tree took to create pods and nutrients lost due to environmental interference. Each type of nutrients has different effects. To avoid imbalanced fertilizing, when fertilizing cocoa, we need to know well the effects of each one to help the trees grow and develop better. First, organic fertilizers have the ability to rehabilitate the soil, increasing aeration and nutrient content. Second, it will create an environment for beneficial microorganisms to grow. Third, organic fertilizers will assist in the breaking down and consumption rate of synthesized fertilizer. Furthermore, organic fertilizers will help the cocoa trees develop healthily with thick and green leaves, reduce pests and diseases, increase flower and pod bearing rates. The pods will be shinier, larger, and increase quality. Urea or nitrogen fertilizers help trees increase their body mass. It helps the trunk, branches, and leaves of the tree grow faster, larger, as well as the pods. On the current market, there are two types of phosphates, rock phosphate and superphosphate. In alkaline soil, it is recommended that rock phosphate be used. Phosphate fertilizers encourage root expansion as well as flower and pod bearing in cocoa trees. As for potassium fertilizers, it assists in the mechanism of the stomata in cocoa leaves, increasing photosynthesis activities. Potassium strengthens the tree, making it more resistant to pests and diseases. Potassium also helps the cocoa tree accumulate sugar and carbohydrates, making the pods and beans larger and firmer. We should also apply lime annually in the plantation. Lime can supplement calcium in the trees as well as reduce acidity level in the soil. Lime can also help eliminate a number of pests and diseases in the cocoa plantation. Cocoa farmers should also spray micronutrient foliage fertilizers 2 to 4 times a year. Micronutrient fertilizer helps cocoa resist pests and diseases, as well as increase the rate of flower and pod bearing. For cocoa to consume fertilizer efficiently, cocoa farmers need to understand the flow of fertilizer through the tree. Fertilizer enters the soil. Root hairs take in the fertilizer and transport it to the leaves through vascular bundles. When met with favorable conditions like sunlight, water, and air, photosynthesis will occur and compound organic matter will be produced. From there, the beneficial compound organic matter will be taken to feed different parts of the tree. Therefore, from the very day it is planted until production stage, the cocoa tree will always need plenty of leaves and receive sunlight for photosynthesis. That way, fertilizer can be used most efficiently. Amount and type of fertilizer for the production stage. With the expectation of yielding around 25 kilograms of pods per tree per year, we will need a specific amount of fertilizer of 2 kilograms per tree per year of the following formula: 400 grams of urea, 800 grams of phosphate, and 800 grams of potassium chloride. If NPK fertilizer is used, we need to use the following formula: 13-11-21 or 12-12-17, or other fertilizers with high potassium content. This is also applied about 2 kilograms per tree per year. For compost organic fertilizer, we need to apply 5 to 10 kilograms per tree per year, or 2 to 3 kilograms of biofertilizer. Lime needs to be applied 300 grams per tree per year. Micronutrients need to be sprayed 2 to 4 times per year. Application method. When applying fertilizer for cocoa, coverage is required to avoid fertilizer evaporation. For organic fertilizers, we need to dig trenches and isolate the root system. Pour in the fertilizer, mix with dirt and cover with a thin layer of soil or leaves on top. For protein, potassium, phosphate, or NPK, we need to dig trenches or rake the layer of leaves aside, spread the fertilizer, and then cover it back up. When applying fertilizer, the soil condition must be at the appropriate moisture level. If it is too dry, we must irrigate immediately for the fertilizer to dissolve. Lime, in particular, needs to be applied once a year at the beginning of the raining season and spread evenly on the surface of the plantation. Foliar fertilizer needs to be sprayed in cloudy and cool weather condition and sprayed on the underside of the leaves. Cocoa has a totally different mechanism of flower and pod bearing compared to most fruit crops, which only bloom flowers and bear fruits once a year. On an optimally cultivated cocoa tree, there should be a complete collection of flowers, newly formed pods, growing pods, ripe pods, and old pods. Therefore, fertilizer application method for cocoa must also be totally different from other crops. It is best if the amount of fertilizers in a year applied for cocoa be spread out as much as possible. Time of application will depend on the development condition of the cocoa tree. For organic fertilizer, lime and phosphate, they need to be applied at the beginning of the raining season, around end of April and the beginning of May. Times of application. During the establishment stage, the amount of complex fertilizer applied is divided evenly between 6 to 8 times in a year. During this stage, the tree is still small, the roots are still few, and we apply fertilizer many times to make it easier to consume and process. When cocoa goes into production stage, urea and potassium are divided into 6 application periods and applied at the markers of after production pruning to encourage flowering and pod bearing at the times of pod growing, around January, March, May, July, September, and November of each year. Furthermore, during these periods, foliar fertilizer needs to be sprayed to supplement all the necessary nutrients for the tree to develop sufficiently and bear pods better. Methods of maximizing fertilizer efficiently. In order to get the most benefit when applying fertilizer, we need to uniformly apply caretaking techniques like appropriate shade management and correct pruning. Apply a balanced and adequate amount of fertilizer. Apply fertilizer in the appropriate humidity, and if fertilizers get covered by dirt or leaves. There should be no wild weeds competing for nutrients. Irrigation in conjunction with fertilizer works the best. When participating in a UTZ certified program, farmers will need to take note of the following. 1. Fertilizer must be applied in a balanced amount and reasonable manner. 2. Increase the amount of organic fertilizer used. 3. Apply fertilizer based on the needs of the tree, the state of the soil based on the age and productivity of the trees. 4. Unused fertilizer must be stored in a cool, dry place with cover. Do not store fertilizer in the same place as cocoa beans or other produce. 5. Fertilizer application equipment must be cleaned and stored properly after use. 6. Keep notes of fertilizer application. Shade adjustment. When cocoa is fully grown, the leaves start to weave into each other. We need to prune thin the shade trees. Most temporary shade trees are cut down around the second year. For permanent shade trees, we should keep 70 to 120 trees per hectare, depending on the type of trees. We should not eliminate the shades too abruptly, which will affect the development of the cocoa trees. We can gradually reduce the shades by pruning the branches, then slowly cutting down some shade trees. In places that are well covered by windbreakers or the wind is not strong, when the cocoa leaves have touching canopies, we can opt to not have shade trees but must supply enough water and fertilizer to prevent the trees from aging and deteriorating too fast. However, to maintain a balanced ecology in the plantation, reduce wind speed, and avoid injuries to young leaves, we should keep shading at around 25%. The purpose of pruning is 1. Easy of passage when caretaking and harvesting. 2. The plantation gets better ventilation, making it easier to prevent and reduce pests and diseases. 3. Help trees have more leaves that receive more sunlight to photosynthesize better. 4. Balance out the architecture. Avoid leaning and falling. 5. Reduce nutrient competition. 6. Increase flower and pod bearing rate and stabilize yield. The principle of pruning is to leave a good amount of leaves on the tree that will receive a good amount of sunlight. Beside that, we must prune to adjust the tree's growth. The branches reach out to every direction to receive as much sunlight as possible. The canopy must take up the space allotted for each tree. The underside of the canopy must be clear. The height of the tree must be appropriate for caretaking and pest and diseases control. Notice, prune gradually. Don't prune too much in one session. Branches should be pruned at the beginning of the raining season and 2 months before the rain ends. To make it convenient for pruning, farmers must have appropriate equipment like small pruning shears, long-range pruners, and handsaw. Pruning during the establishment stage must start right when planting and must be practiced regularly. Cocoa trees are usually pruned as early as right after planting. For cocoa during the establishment stage, we practice the following pruning techniques. For cocoa in their first year, we prune the branches near the bottom of the base. We will also prune the branches splitting out of the lower sections of the trunk. For branches that grow too tall, we will prune them to suppress vertical growth and encourage lateral growth. In plantations where cocoa are intercropped with other crops, they tend to lean and fall. We can use a straight bamboo stick to stabilize the young cocoa like this. When properly cultivated, a healthy first-year cocoa tree should look like the one shown here. When the bottom and lower branches are pruned, the top is cut off and the trunk is stabilized. The cocoa tree will have a full and round canopy. As we can see here, most of the leaves have contact with sunlight. This tree here would be regarded as a very well developed for a first-year cocoa tree. During the second year, some cocoa trees will have canopies growing unevenly. Therefore, we must prioritize pruning the outstanding growing branches so that the canopy will develop well into an evenly round shape. After pruning the tall top branches, the lower branches can now grow to the same height as the higher branches. This is a cocoa tree entering its third year. As we can see here, a third-year cocoa tree has many types of growing branches, such as low-hanging branches near the bottom, outstanding growing branches at the top, and many branches in the midsection that cannot receive sufficient sunlight. Therefore, we will prioritize pruning these branches. However, please note that due to the amount of branches that we will have to prune at one time, we should only prune the trees when they have sufficient water. When pruning, we make our best effort to leave as much leaves on a tree as possible. If small and hidden branches inside the canopy are receiving sunlight, we should leave them on the tree. For cocoa plantations approaching production stage, they will have many low-hanging or weaving branches that can greatly affect accessibility of the plantation's caretaking. That is why during this stage, we must prune low-hanging and weaving branches. Through that, we will define the shape of the cocoa tree as it enters the production stage. We should only leave about 3 to 5 main branches on the cocoa tree, spread evenly in all directions, which will create a reasonable canopy frame for the cocoa tree. If we practice good pruning techniques during the establishment stage, we will not encounter situations like this cocoa tree. Here, the cocoa tree is not pruned during establishment stage, which is why the tree has many crawling branches, drooping branches, and especially a leaning canopy. To remedy the situation, many technical steps must be taken to give cocoa tree a healthier, better-looking canopy. For cocoa plantations that have unpruned, unkempt canopies during production stage, such as this, we will proceed with the following techniques. First step to rehabilitate the canopies is to assess the state of the plantation and the trees. For plantations that are lacking shade trees, we must make steps to grow and provide more shade trees for the plantation. For cocoa plantations that are intercropped with other crops such as coconuts, cashews, or other crops, we must consider modifying the shade trees before modifying the cocoa trees. This is because after pruning the shade trees, we can register adequately the amount of sunlight in the plantation to prune the cocoa trees. Next, we walk around a plantation to look for and prune branches that are overlapping with neighboring canopies. For example, this branch is encroaching to another tree that we want to prune, so we will prune it first. After pruning overlapping branches, the branches that we want to prune will be revealed in the empty spaces around the cocoa tree. This cocoa tree has a crooked, leaning canopy. We will need to use a stick or ropes to restore it to its original position. The purpose of propping up this branch is so that the tree will recover its canopies with lots of leaves, increasing its yield for the next season. Here, we have some low-hanging branches basically crawling on the ground, making it very inconvenient for plantation's access and caretaking. Furthermore, during the raining season, wet soil will splash onto the branches easily, spreading black pod disease. That is why we will have to cut off all the low-hanging branches. After pruning off the low-hanging branches, we proceed to prune the outstanding and broken branches on the top to suppress the overall height of the cocoa tree. Height suppression must be proceeded gradually. We recommend a height of 3 to 3.5 meters in height for easy access as well as easier harvest and pruning. The purpose of pruning up top is to avoid over-pruning during production stage. When pruning off the top, sunlight will have better access to the lower leaves, which will save us from pruning branches hidden inside the canopies and in the midsection. Next, we proceed to inside the canopy. We will prune all the leaves and branches that are not receiving sunlight or weaving into each other to prevent the spread of diseases, as well as eliminating nesting places for pests. This cleaning up of inside the canopy will help with the rate of flower and pod bearing. While pruning, we should also take the opportunity to cut off rotten and infected pods to prevent the spread of pests and diseases during the next raining season. When pruning, we should not prune all the necessary branches to completion at once, but prune in gradual steps. We should take a step back in between, take a look at the overall architecture, assess where it is lacking or having excess to adjust accordingly as we prune. Other branches that need to be pruned are diseased branches, dried branches, abnormal branches, and especially branches that are growing inwards, making the canopy unnecessarily bushy. However, the basic principle of pruning is to leave as much leaves that are receiving sunlight on a tree as possible. As you can see here, this tree is pruned but still has many layers of leaves. However, every layer of leaves is still receiving sunlight. When properly pruned like this, the cocoa tree will have very good and consistent yield next season. Before pruning, we can see that this plantation had many branches that need pruning, like low-hanging, leaning branches, infected branches, and weaving branches inside the canopies. After pruning, the path through the plantation is revealed. Leaves and branches inside the canopies now all receive sunlight. The crawling branches are cleared out, so traversing through the plantation is now much easier. In order for the cocoa trees to maintain a proper, balanced canopy and a plantation maintain a good, consistent yield, architecture pruning of the cocoa trees must be practiced from planting until the end of the cocoa tree's production stage. Notice, for cocoa that are in production stage but have not gone through architecture pruning, branches hang low, affecting the process of caretaking and harvest. We need to cut off these branches and use copper-based antifungal or paint to cover up the cut mark to prevent fungal infection. This is a plantation that has applied architecture pruning. The space is clear, walking access is easy, light can reach the ground and evenly distributed. Time of pruning for production stage. First time is at the beginning of the raining season when the trees have enough water, from May until July. For trees that develop too well, too bushy, we prune twice during the raining season. On top of that, we should regularly prune chupon, branches, infected pods, weaving branches, and small branches at the trunk. After many years following and evaluating the main cocoa production areas in Vietnam, we have seen that there are two agents of pests and diseases that affect the most in productivity, which are black pods and stem canker, caused by the fungal Phytophthora and the insect Helopeltis. To minimize damage caused by these two agents, cocoa farmers need to do well these tasks. Find out about the pest and disease. We need to identify the reason, condition of growth, damages caused by the pest and disease, and methods of control. Methods of prevention before treatment. Regularly visit the plantation to deal promptly with the problems. Harvest and treat black pods. Cut and prune infected branches from the plantation and burn them. In the beginning of the raining season, the plantation must be pruned clean. Lightly prune the shade trees and clear the plantation of weeds. During the raining periods, before extended raining periods, plantation sanitation work needs to be continued to reduce soil humidity, and branches need to be pruned to let in more sunlight. Weaver ants and cocoa black ants can be raised in the plantation. Apply a balanced mix of fertilizer to increase the tree's health. Black pods and stem canker are the two main diseases that currently cause the most damage to cocoa farmers. Both diseases are caused by the same parasite, which is the fungal Phytophthora palmivora. Black pod and stem canker are the two main diseases of cocoa. The disease will appear throughout the growth cycle of the trees, from nursery until harvest. The disease attacks all parts of the tree: trunk, leaves, flowers, young pods, and old pods. The disease exists in all cocoa growing areas and develops especially aggressive in wet conditions of the raining season with high humidity. The disease spread mainly from two sources, from the soil and from pod mummies. To prevent the disease, cocoa farmers must practice integrated disease management. Once a tree is heavily infected, we will remedy this with a different technique by injecting into the trunk the chemical potassium phosphonate. We use a hand drill with a drill bit diameter of 5 mm, drill straight into the base of the trunk to a depth of 3 cm. We then use a specialized syringe to push the medication into the tree. If it is dry and sunny at the time of injection, it will take 15 to 20 minutes to push an amount of about 20 cc of medication. In the case of lack of sunlight, it might take longer. It must be noted that we must avoid injection in the evening or when it's raining. Phytophthora is a soil-borne disease. The most dangerous stage is when the fungus is forming sporangium and is releasing zoospores. Suitable conditions for this fungus to develop is when the soil is affected by external elements due to frequent changes in temperature as well as humidity. The following picture is an image of the fungus Phytophthora moving about in a liquid environment. It is ready to invade the trunk, pods, and leaves to spread the disease on contact. When we see rotten pods with white powder on the shell, that is when the fungus is forming sporangium and releasing zoospores as shown in the image here. This is the most dangerous stage, for the disease is spreading. When met with favorable conditions, within a short period, almost all of the pods in the plantation can be infected and the pods go black. Therefore, to prevent the development and growth of this fungus, we absolutely cannot leave disease pods on the trees since the disease will spread. As soon as signs of the disease are showing, the disease pods must be cut, buried, or burned as soon as possible. Furthermore, cocoa farmers should prune the plantation at the beginning of the raining season for better ventilation and sunlight access, reducing the humidity level of the plantation, creating unfavorable conditions for the disease to develop. We must reduce the opportunities for the trees to come in contact with the soil by creating a constant layer of coverage on the surface soil level to avoid soil splashing onto the trees during rain or irrigation. On top of that, with a layer of organic matter covering the surface, the level of temperature and humidity in a plantation will be more constant. Do note that when covering the tree bases in the plantation, areas too close to the roots must be left open to prevent humidity level from rising too high, which is the favorable condition for the disease to attack the cocoa trees. Aside from the mentioned methods, cocoa farmers should also use chemical supplements to prevent the disease from attacking the roots, trunks, and pods. Here, we have some buds that were stung by Helopeltis over an extended period of time. These buds will wither and dry up. One might mistake this for a disease, but this is caused by the pest Helopeltis stinging the young buds. As for newly formed pods, when stung by Helopeltis, will also wither and dry up. Larger pods might not dry up, but they will be deformed and not look well, as we can see from these black spots. These are also sting marks from Helopeltis. When stung by Helopeltis, young buds dry up, small pods shrivel and dry up, large pods become deformed. Plantations infected with Helopeltis will not develop well, and the yield will be reduced. We need to check up on the plantation regularly. In plantations that are bushy and unkempt, not looked after frequently, pesticides are rarely used. Helopeltis can develop very fast and cause great harm to the plantation. Helopeltis are active early in the morning and late cool afternoon. On overcast days, they are active the whole day. This pest mostly populate during the middle and the end of the raining season in damp and low canopies or leafy and shady trees of the plantation. When the pods are stung by Helopeltis, they leave behind black dots on the pod, which will remain for the rest of the duration the pods are on the tree. To prevent Helopeltis, cocoa farmers need to sanitize and ventilate the plantation thoroughly. When Helopeltis appear, we need to assess if the amount of Helopeltis present is enough to harm the entire plantation. If the Helopeltis population is still low, we don't need to apply pesticide uniformly, only on the infected trees. However, if Helopeltis is present on most of the trees in the plantation, we need to spray uniformly all over the plantation with specialized pesticide. The best time to spray pesticide is when the flowers are about to bloom and when the pods are forming about the size of a bean. We should spray pesticide early in the morning when Helopeltis are still slow on the move. To eliminate Helopeltis thoroughly in the plantation, we need to spray the plantation with pesticide in 2 consecutive sessions with a 10 to 12 days interval in between. Furthermore, cocoa also get attacked by other pests and diseases like cocoa beetle, aphid, and stem borer. To prevent this, cocoa farmers must regularly visit the plantation to recognize the problem early, prune and shape the canopies so that the plantation get good ventilation, and if the plantation is attacked by pests and diseases, cocoa farmers must come up with the appropriate solution. On top of that, we can also prevent pests by biocontrol through using natural enemies like beneficial insects to suppress different harmful pests. Weaver ant is one of those agents. This insect has been used for a long time all over the world to eliminate pests on many different kinds of crop. Weaver ants are very effective in suppressing many types of harmful pests like Helopeltis and other leaf-eating insects. On cocoa, weaver ants are very effective at suppressing Helopeltis that stings the pods. Besides red ants, black ants are also capable of lessening the damage caused by Helopeltis, black pods, and mice. To ensure safety when using pesticides, cocoa farmers should only use agrochemicals that are recommended. At locations where pesticides are stored, chemical mixing equipment and spraying gear need their own storage space, away from residents, utilities, and farm animals. It is best to build a separate space in a cocoa plantation for convenience of use and for the safety of the farmers, farm animals, and environment. When participating in a UTZ certified program, farmers will need to take note of the following. 1. Do not use chemicals prohibited in Vietnam and other markets like Europe, America, and Japan. 2. Follow the instructions on the packaging of the chemicals. 3. Prioritize less toxic chemicals. 4. Wear protective gear when spraying chemicals. 5. Protective gear must be washed, dried, and stored in a well-ventilated place. 6. Warning signs and isolation periods must be notified and placed near areas where chemicals are sprayed. 7. Do not spray chemicals within 5 meters of buffer areas, 10 meters from water surfaces, or 15 meters from flowing water sources. 8. Water used to wash spraying equipment must not be poured down water sources, but sprayed into the plantation or poured into open soil in the plantation. 9. Empty containers of chemicals must not be left in the open, but contained in a dedicated area. 10. Chemicals must be stored according to regulations. 11. Children under 18, pregnant or breastfeeding mothers must be kept from contact with chemicals. 12. Weeds should be cleared manually. If chemicals have to be used, they must be of permitted chemicals. 13. Note down the use of chemicals. 14. Must have a list of chemicals used on the premise. 15. The person who picks out the chemicals or holds the keys to the chemical storage must be trained on the subject. 16. Regularly practice plantation sanitation to prevent pests and diseases. Of the cocoa plantations that are currently in production stage, only 70% of the trees will provide consistent yield. The rest 30% of the trees fall into the categories of unknown origins, have small beans, susceptible to pests and diseases, or affected by misaligned canopies due to shading. Many cocoa gardens that are well taken care of by the farmers still have low yield. Because of that, rehabilitation grafting must be taken place annually in cocoa gardens with a goal of 95% achieving consistent productivity. Benefits of rehabilitation by grafting includes maximizing the use of existing tree trunks and roots, rejuvenating the plantation, replace poor existing varieties, increase uniformity in the plantation, quicker yield time and stable productivity after 18 months grafting. Currently, there are 2 grafting methods, side grafting and chupon grafting. To successfully execute rehabilitation grafting, the farmer needs to prepare the grafting equipment, which includes a handsaw to clear up the grafting areas as well as pruning the rootstock, a set of pruners to easily cut the scions, a knife specialized for grafting. The knife needs to be sharp with a pointed tip for smoother movement during grafting. We will also need a set of cords like these to tie the scion into the rootstock when side grafting. For side grafting, we will also need plastic sheets such as these to cover the scion after grafting so that it won't get wet from water or fog. The plastic sheets must be clean and unused. It must not have been used to contain any other type of material before this. For chupon grafting, we will need a specialized plastic tape roll like this to ensure safety for the plant and increase the grafting survival rate. To ensure that the grafting will result in high yield, we must observe the trees over many harvests. The source of the grafting material must be strong, healthy, and resistant to pests and diseases. The beans should be big with high yield. There are 2 types of buds that we can collect for grafting. First is the bud that grows from the main trunk. This bud is usually very strong and healthy. The second type is the bud that grows from the branches. These buds are usually more plentiful than the ones that grow from the main trunk. It is easier to collect buds that grow from the branches. When selecting scions, they must meet the following requirements. The scion must be fully grown with nodes. It must not be too young or too old. The surface of the scion stem has already turned brown. We must choose the scions that are healthy with axillary buds with the size of a rice grain. Application of fertilizer must be halted 20 days before the collection of grafting scions. We must also choose the appropriate sections to collect. For example, the tip here is too young and must be cut off. To increase contact with the rootstock when grafting, the scion must be straight, not too curved or crooked. When selecting rootstock for grafting, we should select trees that are healthy and meet all the requirements. The first step we take is to prune 25% of the total leaves and branches on the tree so that the entire tree receives direct sunlight. Next, we proceed to clean up the area where we will graft so that we can work smoothly. In cocoa trees that are in production stage, we will need to execute side grafting at 2 locations on a tree. The first graft is about 30 to 40 centimeters from the ground up on the main trunk. The second graft is about 15 to 20 centimeters above the first graft on the opposite side of the main trunk. First, we cut an A-shaped incision into the bark. After pulling open the incision, we can see that the wood inside is bright yellow. This means that the tree is healthy and ready for grafting. If after opening the incision and we find that the wood inside is torn and deep yellow, we should cover up the bark because the tree is not healthy enough for grafting. As for the scion, we will cut it at a slanted angle on both sides into a spear shape. The cut must be flat, even, and kept clean. For this scion, we will take 3 nodes here, here, and here. We then place the scion into the rootstock, positioning it so that there is as much contact between them as possible. We will cut off the tip of the A on the bark, making it easier for the scion to grow later. We will then use the plastic cord to tie firmly this grafting section. We now tie this plastic sheet over the grafted area and cover it to prevent water from collecting near the graft. Pull the sides of the plastic sheet that covers the graft tightly so that water cannot get in. Then pull the top down like this. We have finished side grafting. This is a tree that we have finished grafting at both locations, opposite sides of each other. Within 20 days after grafting, we must check up constantly on the grafted tree. If there are young buds sprouting from the main trunk or near the graft, we must prune them off to make sure that the nutrients and energy is focused on the graft. After observing the graft for 3 weeks, if the graft starts to heal and buds start to sprout from the graft, we take off the top end of the plastic sheet. Remember to remove just the top part for the scion to grow. As for the bottom of the plastic, we will leave it there for now to keep the graft tight together. Method of chupon grafting. With this method, we can leave up the branches that grow from the main trunk. The chupons that meet the requirements are about 40 to 50 centimeters. The chupon branch must be old enough and stiff enough. Only then can we proceed with chupon grafting. We can cut right where it is stiff enough. Similar to side grafting, we must select good scions to graft. We will cut the tip of the scion from a slanted angle into a spear shape, even on both sides. We then split the rootstock from the top down about 2 to 3 centimeters. For this scion, we will also take about 2 to 3 nodes. This is the best solution for rehabilitation grafting. We will place the scion into the rootstock. Note that when sliding the scion into the rootstock, their shapes might not fit perfectly. In that case, make sure that one side have full contact with the cut. The other side is optional. The graft only need one side of full contact to survive well. When executing chupon grafting, we should use degradable plastic tape to tie the graft together. At the cut marks of the scion, we can only cover one layer of degradable plastic tape so that when the buds bloom, they will pierce through the plastic and grow out. Beside the degradable plastic tape, we can also use a plastic bag to cover the scion graft. The steps are also similar to the previous method, but instead of using degradable plastic, we will cut the plastic bag into a strip and use it to tie up our graft. We then use another clean plastic bag to cover up the entire grafted section. We then tie up the opening in the bottom to prevent the loss of moisture in the scion. The best time to graft is in the beginning of the dry season, around November to March. The survival rate is around 90%. Aside from that, we can graft all year round, but the survival rate will be lower. Avoid grafting in the heavy raining season around August to October. Caretaking after grafting. We should check the scions 3 weeks after grafting by opening the top part of the plastic. If possible, after 1 week, spray foliar fertilizer every 5 to 7 days because the scions still have not received much nutrients. After 8 to 10 weeks, remove the plastic completely. Note that in the case that new buds from the scions are still young, we must check for helopeltis and spray pesticide often. When the scion has sprouted 5 to 7 pairs of new leaves, cut the top to promote development of 2 to 3 initial branches. When the initial branches have sprouted 5 to 7 pairs of leaves, cut the top again to promote development of secondary branches and the practice of shape pruning right from the beginning. Keep note that after a successful graft, when the buds are developing, we must prune old branches at the top canopy. The pruning is divided into 4 sessions. We will prune 25% of the canopies for each sessions. First pruning session is 15 days after grafting. Second pruning session is 2 months after grafting. Third pruning session is 4 months after grafting. Fourth pruning session is 6 months after grafting. In this session, we cut off the entire main trunk, leaving only a section of about 20 to 30 centimeters above the graft. To avoid water collecting on the graft, the cut should be slanted about 35 to 45 degrees. After pruning, we need to cover the cuts with copper-based solution or paint to prevent pests and diseases from infecting the cuts. Fire prevention. After the main pruning, at the end of harvest, a large amount of leaves will remain on the plantation. This layer of organic matter is very good in reducing erosion during raining seasons and increase soil fertility when decomposed. On the flip side, during the dry season, this layer of dried leaves can be a fire hazard. Therefore, at the end of the raining season, we need to sanitize the plantation. Part of this organic matter will be used to cover the cocoa bases to keep the moisture while creating shelter for pollinating insects. The rest should be buried in trenches to avoid fire, as well as increasing the organic matter in the soil.